So, Emmy, thanks a million for coming on the show. I want to hit you straight away with I suppose, a quote. So, early on in the book, you talk about Hare's PCLR test. Now, I think there's so many issues with that. We can get into them if you like, but you do call out a quote by Hare, and it says, psychopaths are social predators who charm, manipulate, and plough their way through life, leaving a trail of destruction, shattered lives, shattered expectations, and empty wallets. Now, my big thing is here with this, like, if we hear so much about neurodiversity now, like if a researcher said that about someone with autism or someone with dyslexia, or like, not that maybe they're doing, some of them character traits, but like, how do you feel? Like, there's this big movement about, neurodiversity, we have to champion it. How do you feel like when psychopathy or sociopathy is so demonized in media, public, likes of research even there? How does that strike you? Maybe how does it feel? Isn't the right word.
Yeah, it doesn't actually bother me that much because I think at the time it was pretty accurate. But I think it's kind of like, it would be like saying, oh, somebody with autism, that's basically like a death sentence. If you said that in the 1970s, in some way it would have been accurate, because there was really no understanding of what autism is. There was no understanding of like how to educate somebody with severe autism, somebody with, I have this boy in my church congregation, with severe autism, and he's in his early teens, and he recently gave like a little talk in church that was through his tablet. He's completely nonverbal, but in his tablet he gave this talk, and he even had jokes, and it was so crazy to understand there's actually somebody in there, after hearing him just kind of moan and have kind of difficulties during church, staying quiet, staying even in the building. And so I think that type of knowledge just wasn't there like in the 1970s. And if you just looked at the surface, that's what you would see. And so I kind of think in some ways it's maybe just because that's the time period that Hare was operating under, the 1970s, the 1980s. And I think there was in a lot of fields, psychology, history, like kind of a desire to not really grapple with the truth, but to, I don't know, almost like when I watch old 60 Minutes episodes, do you know what 60 Minutes is?
Yeah.
From kind of like the 1980s, there's like this almost like weird way in which everybody seems to be approaching life, like the truth or whatever. It's just kind of like this glossy film. And I wonder if it's the Cold War, where it's like we can't dig deep because if we dig deep, maybe we're going to see our shadow. And we can't be seeing our shadow and fighting our shadow at the same time that we're fighting this very real threat of, total extinction. So I don't know why it was kind of so limited, and it was almost like they intentionally had blinders on. And that's the more criticism I have. It was demonized, I think, because they just didn't want to grapple with the reality. They didn't want to dig a little bit deeper at that time. And I don't think it was just him, but it is kind of like, well, now that we have moved on, he has not. Robert Hare, he stays there. So.
And it's probably a sampling issue. Like, we know, like, all Hare's work was conducted in prisons. When we know, like, if you've read any of Kevin Dutton, he has the Good Psychopath's Guide to Success and the Wisdom of Psychopaths. Like, the pro-social benefits are, incredibly good. I even think you had another line in the book where it was something like almost to the effect of, empaths can be like, go and commit like crazy crimes as well, but like, because they show remorse, the jury's going to be more favourable to them. And it's wild, but it's wild that so much of the research that it's based on is like so flawed by the sampling bias of prison populations, but it's very hard to get into a boardroom, I suppose, to a CEO and like, hey, take this test. It's not an easy access where the prisons were. So it was maybe an opportunistic sampling bias.
Well, I think you have kind of two points there: the sampling bias, and then this idea about empaths kind of getting away with murder, which they do get away with murder. Certain types. And that's what I learned in law school, is that if they, walk into their bedroom and find their spouse, having sex with somebody else, and they kill them, that's not murder. That's technically not murder. Like, it's legally not murder. Yeah. And some of them will just get off completely scot-free, and that's just what the law is, because the law takes into consideration, especially kind of traditionally, that average person. And so everybody else thinks like, well, I would do the same, and so we can't criminalize that. I think that's basically the reasoning. It's just that since you would do the same, then you're not going to criminalize it. But the stuff I do, you guys think is creepy and weird. So you're definitely like going to criminalize it. So that's a little bit, one of the things is like certain things you decide are crimes and not crimes based on just kind of your feelings, normal people. The second thing is the sampling errors, hair, and most of the, who I really respect is Hervey Cleckley. He wrote
Mask of Sanity.
Mask of Sanity, thank you. And he kind of says in the Mask of Sanity, I guess even by its title, he's saying here's some people who have, I think he called it moral insanity. He said just like they don't have correct moral reasoning. And that's accurate. Like psychopaths don't tend to have the moral reasoning that other people have. And who knows what that means. I think that's like an indictment of moral reasoning. Where does moral reasoning come from? If it's not logical, if it's not something that you could teach somebody. Yeah. But then he talks about a bunch of people that he worked with over the years, and they were like normal people. There was like one woman who, she loved Dostoevsky, and she, had a bunch of affairs and, married and like divorced a bunch of times. Stuff that would have been totally inappropriate for her class and her standing, as a white woman, during the 1930s and 40s in the United States. But stuff that wasn't criminal, and another story, it's actually one of my favorite stories, is this young kind of heir to, he's like comes from a wealthy family. He's like at 19 or 20 or something. And then on a whim, he goes and gets a bunch of day laborers who happen to be African American. And this is like in the segregated South. Grabs them, goes to a cheap motel, and then they just have like an orgy until the motel owner calls the cops. The cops show up. He gets in trouble for all sorts of laws against, I guess like having sex, obviously homosexual sex, but also like with, interracial. And he's not doing anything wrong that we would think are wrong, but he's definitely breaking social norms. And I think that's what I like about Cleckley, is he doesn't necessarily say there's an inherent criminality to the psychopath, because I don't think there is the inherent criminality. They will break social norms because they don't sense those social norms in the same way. They don't really have a fear of what other people are going to think of them. They don't have any, I guess, connection to the social norm in a way that they think that it's valid or anything to kind of pay attention to. But I'll tell you like one thing, I can see why Hare would associate psychopathy with criminality. And he was really an inflection point, I think, in the 20th century in our modern understanding of psychopathy. He was very, he's Canadian researcher, and he did all of his research in forensic settings. So it was all in prison. It was in Canadian prisons, and it was just male. So I like to say, there's like an obvious, even if you've taken just statistics 101, in community college, junior college or something, you would understand that there's a sampling error there. That if, for instance, I went to church, and studied psychopaths, that I would be like, wow, they are so church going. Like that's the reason why they're there. So it can't be you can't kind of derive like some sort of association. I do think this is like a really slippery kind of hard thing for even researchers to address, because the more that they address this issue regarding hair, the more they kind of undermine all of their research, because even the concept of psychopathy before hair, who had like a little bit of a braggadocio about it, where it was like, no, this is what psychopathy is. Here's the, 18 or whatever things that he's studying in his PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, which is still a very dominant, especially in forensic settings, as like people call it like the gold standard. Yeah. And diagnosing, and you have to have something that can diagnose people as psychopaths, because that's the first step of every research when you're studying psychopaths is, are you a psychopath or not, right? So I can see how it's like they're very reluctant to kind of challenge his particular criteria for what leads to a diagnosis of a psychopath, because then what is the criteria? Then we're maybe into decades of arguing and quibbling amongst each other. Is it criminality? Is it this? What I really think, and people have talked about this, researchers have talked about this issue. One thing that suggests to me that the definition of psychopathy is not let's say like it's a little sick, is that it includes both really hot-headed people, like very emotionally reactionary people. And to illustrate this, I like to use the story, this guy who gets out of prison on parole. He goes home and like almost immediately kills his girlfriend and his baby, because he's jealous. He's like, you did all these things while I'm in prison, and now, I'm so angry, I'm killing both you and the baby or whatever. Like a hothead. Right? You have that, and then you also have like a cold-hearted person that is so zero emotionally reactive that, we can't even, people who have emotions almost can't even understand what it would even be like to experience emotions at such a low level. Yeah. And I think, can those two people be the same? Can they both be psychopaths?
Definitely, there's going to be such variance in, like, even within psychopath, and you're going to have the same, or some are going to be high functioning, low functioning. Like impulsivity seems to skew more to really high functioning, but you'll still have high levels of impulsivity. But it's like saying, an STI, they're all an STI, but which one is it? Like, so there's different variants in it. But I just want to bring back one thing, because I'm really happy you brought up Cleckley's book, because in your book, you talk, you kind of get this absence of self, right? But you in the earlier chapters, you stumble upon Cleckley's book when you're like, your co-worker had mentioned you might have been a sociopath and stuff. But like, I find it was so interesting. I was zoned in on this straight away when I read that in the book. Was finding almost this kind of identity within being a sociopath. You find Cleckley's book, you almost find these hallmarks. It's like some kid, finding their identity in a sports team, or I'm going to follow that player, or I love this musician, with the, like, Swifties and stuff. Their identity, part of their identity becomes swelled up into this like object to project themselves onto. Was there a part there then when you stumble upon this, you didn't have that, you had that absence of self, but finding out then, okay, there's an identity here almost that I'm a sociopath. Did you feel that, or was it no? Was it still like this is just a kind of a cursory label?
That's a really good question. I think probably at the time I would have said I didn't feel a strong sense of identity still from it. I think though that now, I think what the issue with psychopaths is, there's a sense of self there, it's better to say there's a self there. There's an identity there. Definitely I have preferences for certain things. Definitely I have, other things about my identity. I prefer Bach over Brahms, like I don't prefer scary movies. I prefer like intellectual thrillers or whatever. I like mysteries. It's been a while since I've read a book. Yeah. There's like definitely things that I kind of, that make up me. But back then I just wasn't like that interested in it. It didn't like really motivate me. It didn't really resonate. So it could have been like, like let's say you are listening to a language that's foreign or something. You're hearing it. You're hearing it, but you're not listening to it, you know? And I think that's what it was. Like, I think like back then I felt like I was hearing that I was a sociopath, but I wasn't really listening to it. It wasn't really like kind of like being internalized. I wasn't absorbing it. I was just kind of aware of it. So it's like a little bit tricky because I think it must have influenced me somehow because it kept motivating me. That's why I think that it must have influenced me. Even though at the time I would have been like, I'm still like a cipher. I'm nothing. Like I'm nothingness embodied or whatever. That's how it felt at the time, to not really have a strong sense of self. But there must have been something, because it's led to this like decades long journey to explore this particular topic.
Yeah. And I think everyone probably goes through a journey of kind of exploring their self, but I get what you mean. It's I think that absence of self, the way you like, obviously there's a self there, but maybe the kind of absence around the meaning, or what that actually, maybe the kind of bigger aspect of it. Like, one of the things there I had, so the book I wrote was based on pretty much a psychopath, like mainly on him, but he had a twin sister that was even almost more psychopathic. But I was tying around with the title Perfectly Sane for a long time, because I thought it was a really good, it would have been a good title. But like, when you read through all the descriptions, like when you read through, like, pretty much immune to depression, anxiety, PTSD. You can have like psychopaths like Andy McNabb is probably his book is so good, that Bravo 20, where he goes to war, gets tortured, teeth pulled out, and when you're reading it, it's like it's just like shrugging the shoulders almost. You can hear the like low affect in the tone of voice when he's describing it. But there's almost it's the most sane personality that can be, because it's immune to all these like pathologies that kind of plague normal people, and then if you go down the spectrum, even more so towards empaths and that neurotic, which is like plagued by it. But what's your take on that? Like, would you ascribe to my claim that psychopaths are perfectly sane?
In a way, yes. I think that there are certain things that they're really immune to that are like insanities, or I think they're insanities. For instance, they're really immune to mob mentality. Like, it's almost like a circuit breaker. Like the mob mentality, spreads, hits the psychopath and then stops. And I actually think that that's one of the biggest advantages that psychopaths are to a society. Like, a society with psychopaths is going to do better than a society without psychopaths because of that. Because it's great that people have tribal feelings towards each other, sense of cohesion and a sense of like a mimetic contagion, like everybody kind of gets so caught up in a particular belief, like classic examples of like Nazism or whatever it is, like the Spanish Inquisition,
But most of the Nazis weren't. Like, they were like, the research they did, like, most of the Nazis weren't psychopaths. They were just obeying orders. Like, it's like situational psychopathy nearly. But sorry to cut you off. Keep going.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure the people doing like the Spanish Inquisition were also not psychopaths. There were normal people who cared enough about a particular cause to do terrible things to each other, to do terrible things to the rest of humanity. Like, a psychopath does not care enough about a cause.
And you say that in the book. Psychopaths aren't zealots. The cause stops with, what's in it for them more so. Like, I love that line. That was such a good line in the book, that sociopaths are not zealots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's like a rationality that they have, is that they won't ever get caught up in something like that, because they don't have strong enough feelings or attachment to something to ever do that. So I think that most of the kind of rationality, I guess, or like the sanity, comes from those types of aspects. I also think since they are not really aware of themselves in the moment, they're not even really experiencing their own emotions, So like, I also am a musician, and I don't experience stage fright. I never do. Nor do I experience really being self-conscious. Like, the other day, I just joined kind of like this cover band, it does like soul hits from the 60s or whatever, right? Yeah. And we were doing band photos, and there were some people who you could tell they were just like, like crawling in their own skin or whatever. It felt so weird to be posing to do these band photos. And I'm like, I don't care at all. Like, this is not me, nor is it, not me. I'm just kind of doing a photo for a particular purpose, and so it's like you just kind of do whatever. Like, like I can perform on command like really easily, because I can just kind of, I'm not worried about the way that it's reflecting on me at the same time. And I actually had a studio music professor who said that you cannot perform at the same time that you're evaluating yourself.
No.
Like you can't be like, oh, that was a mistake or whatever. I missed a note or something. You can't have that evaluation kind of filter that you're running everything through and at the same time be performing your best. And I think that psychopaths are so good at compartmentalizing that it's like I can just go into performance mode and just be like, I'll just do the best that I can, and that's all I can do in this moment. Like there's nothing else I can change except doing the best I can. And I think that really is the rational decision. And so I could imagine how like an Andy McNabb, in those types of situations would just be like, maybe I should have gone to the shooting range more or maybe I should have learned Farsi, or maybe there would have been like some things that would help me in this situation, but that time's not now. And so I'm not going to waste any of my current energy or attention worrying about what could have been, or even worrying about your own safety. And I think that's probably what seems so effective about them, and kind of sane in certain situations. I think though, honestly, and this is to like push back a little bit on like the idea of them being perfectly sane, it's not as if though they don't have those feelings at all. Like I have spoken to this guy similar to Andy McNabb, basically has the same kind of background, and he has PTSD now.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So there is. It's probably just on a lower resonance than. It's not as amplified as in like a brain that's probably where the amygdala maybe is a bit bigger, and there's more of an emotional nerve center anyway.
And I almost think too, like this guy I know probably has a kill count of like over 100, right? And almost maybe that is like what happens is the psychopath takes maybe too many risks, and then they get to that breaking point where maybe he would have been okay at a kill count of 20 or something, but like a kill count of 100 or something was just like,
over the top.
How can you kind of come back from that into normal life, I think is part of the difficulty. So I don't know.
And what's if you don't mind me asking, like maybe you can share, maybe not, what's the PTSD related to? Is it like specific, like, because the way I'm thinking anyway is like the PTSD is I could have done like better in them situations, or is it like crippling where it's like, I know because there's flashbacks, you're reliving it, but is it? So yeah, my point is actually, is it he's reliving the bad he did, or that he could have did better? Like, so I killed these people, it's terrible, or is it, I could have killed more and or I could have done better, I could have saved my teammate, etc.
That's a really good question. I think for him, it's kind of more of like an absurdist kind of existential angst. That it's opened up for him. Like he never used to feel existential angst, and now he's kind of like, what's the point of everything if this is like what we do with our life? What is life? And I think that is the thing that feels maybe worse as bad as it does to him. I'm sure he does also have like moments, where it was like, oh, I let this guy die because I didn't respond fast enough, that too. But this idea of like, if I've chosen to do this with my life, what does that make me? Questions that he probably wouldn't have asked himself. Right.
Yeah. So I want to go back there because you said something very interesting a few minutes ago where, a society of psychopaths would probably do better. Like, my thing is that psychopathy and like Western society, which is capitalism, is almost in juxtaposed together in almost a perfect parallel. You take the economy, everything is like, competition, ruthless competition. A lot of the hallmarks and the tenets of psychopathy almost overlap with capitalism and a fully functioning society. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Why is like, them society aspects so especially in business, so honored and so put in a pedestal, where then when it's, when it's put on an individual, it's demonized.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think that's like an interesting kind of question in general. Like, why has capitalism been demonized too?
Yeah, it's it's a psychopath's playbook, but just on a
Yeah,
on a
exactly.
grand scale, and it does fairly well, I think. Well, depends who you ask, and their, maybe their political leanings, but capitalism seems to be one of the best political regimes. But yeah, again, that's preference based.
Yeah. So, well, I think, to defend the psychopath here is to defend a little bit capitalism, which I'd love to do, actually, because let's start with capitalism, because sometimes it's easier to kind of see. So, for instance, the United States is super pro bankruptcy. Like, it's very easy to get bankruptcies in the United States. And one of the reasons for this is historically, it was a country of debtors. It was a country of people who came and had nothing and then would take, big loans and then lose everything. And so they had to have a way to start over. I think Australia is kind of similar in this way, country of debtors. And I would guess that they also have really liberal bankruptcy laws. So the idea in the United States is we want people taking risks. We want people to start that bakery shop. We want people to start that factory and to go ahead and devote their entire lives to this whatever project. And if it fails, then we'll just be like, well, I mean, it failed, and the investors knew that it was a risk. They could look at you if they wanted to and see that you don't have any assets. And if they were still willing to take the risk, that's on them, basically. So it's sometimes we think of capitalism as being like very anti the little man, but at least with the United States, this form that we have with the very liberal bankruptcy laws is very pro the little man, and it's anti the bankers, I guess, and it's anti the people who would have the money to kind of invest. And I think when you apply this to psychopaths, well, first let's back up. Why do we want them to take risks? It's because if the factory succeeds, then it benefits everybody. It's employing people, the city grows, they're donating money to, the
standard of living goes up.
Yeah, the art museum, we're able to now fund the new courthouse or the new school or whatever else is happening, right? So if they're willing to take a risk, and it's not really like the society suffers. Like if the factory's polluting or something, let's assume this is not a polluting factory.
Yeah.
Let's assume the bakery's not poisoning people. Like people like that. It's a productive use of whatever is happening. And it's not really like it's no skin off their backs society, because it's just this one person who's decided to do this, and devote their entire life to this business for whatever reason. So we really benefit from these people who are willing to do that, from like the Steve Jobs of the world, even like, this is controversial, Elon Musk's of the world. Yeah. People who are willing to devote their life to just keep making stuff, we truly benefit. And most people are reluctant probably to do something like that. They're not really entrepreneurs. They would rather kind of work for the person. And so it's like a very good symbiosis, because you have the workers who are like happy to work at the bakery or the factory, and then you have the person who's willing to take all the risks and wants to be in charge, wants to have sleepless nights, wants to be the one that like people call, like at 3 a.m. or whatever. Like that's what they have opted into doing for whatever reason. And you guys don't have to do that. You can just have like, your mountain biking hobby or whatever else, your family of 6 or whatever else it's what you want to do. So similarly, I think there's a good symbiosis between psychopaths and normal people, is because they just have different strengths and interests. Like the psychopath is willing to assume a lot more risk than a normal person is willing to assume. And I think, speaking to what we just talked about in the military, like the statistics about how many people actually are shooting to kill in an average army are really low. It's low. Like, I think it's like 11% are like shooting, even lower than that. Same with what?
Cops or police, it's low as well, yeah.
Yeah, because they do not want to have the life change of being a killer.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see it, with like my friend who, who has the kill count of 100 or whatever, like that would be a hard thing for especially somebody who's not a psychopath to deal with.
Yeah.
I think that would be a very big burden. And the psychopaths don't feel it as much as a burden. They still feel the burden a little bit, but definitely there's like a big distinction, kind of like the same way the entrepreneur doesn't feel the additional stress as much as like somebody, Joe Normal or whatever might kind of feel it. So it's good. There's a good symbiotic relationship there when kind of stuff needs to happen. I think Kevin Dutton really talks about this in a great way, like that psychopaths take like the kind of dirty jobs, the jobs that no one wants.
Yeah.
Sometimes we say that in the United States with regard to immigrants, like the jobs that a natural born United American is unwilling to do. So some of these immigrants are like perfectly happy to do. And you can have whatever feelings that you have about this, but I think that when, if those are jobs that you want done as a society and you're not willing to do them, then yeah, it does probably help society to have those people come in and do it. And so I think it's kind of a similar argument there is all kind of capitalism is doing is allowing for people to kind of come up and volunteer and be like, I'll be the entrepreneur. And there's nobody, choosing like, oh, we need a volunteer. Somebody needs to start up this factory. There's no need to kind of say it because people have like a natural risk tolerance and they have a natural ability to see opportunities. And that's another thing is psychopaths do, getting back to that Robert Hare quote, where he was like, they exploit people. I don't think that they exploit people necessarily, but they do find opportunities to exploit. That
they're
is
outcome oriented. So it's all outcome, and the outcome typically tends to probably benefit the psychopath more than anyone else. Which again, like I work in sales, like that's our whole thing. Like you take my like the whole thing. It's like you're gonna when you're making a sale, you're gonna have to exploit insecurities. You're gonna hunt for them. You're gonna have to be ruthless. You're going like. But then like rewards and sales, then it's like, yeah, good job. It's like, they're the whole sort of things. And like, so many of my points are just trying to, and just chat with you around like this demonization of trying to go through the logic almost, and for the listeners that, some of these are just kind of, it just seems a little silly. Like, I'm not naive. Obviously, psychopaths, 25% of the prison population tends to be very psychopathic, or up to 25%. They can cause harm. But I think this blanket approach that we've taken, society has taken, that psychology has taken, research, Hollywood, all this is this kind of demonization that you just don't really see across like other aspects of personality disorders nearly, or neurological, like that neurodiversity term that's kind of bandied about. So it's good to kind of bounce these ideas off you and just get your opinion on them. I want to go back to one thing because a light bulb just went in my head when you were saying it, that like so the USA and Australia, with them bankruptcy, it's easier to file for bankruptcy. But like, I was watching that show, American Primeval. I don't know if you've seen it. Oh, Jesus, brutal. But it clicked with me like that. The people that were going over, leaving like Ireland and UK and Scotland, like it was almost like the psychopaths left the country, because the only people going to get on them coffin ships were the biggest risk takers. And as we know, you even say it in your book, like you lost all your savings on high risk trading. You wanted to live in rough areas. You'd go around on bikes in the city because there was a bit of thrill and danger. That, like, honestly, what almost happened to these countries in Europe that all fled to the US and to the Australia was, it probably took like the most psychopathic people out of the population. And that's why when like people in Ireland, we look over to like America, they're like our rowdy cousins, are like crazier cousins. And it's probably because that psychopathy gene got into the population pool at a higher prevalence than it would naturally.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to go back to another part there as well. Like, and I think it was you and your brother Jim. You were chasing your parents' car, and you eventually lose the chase anyway. But you had such a really poetic line in it, and it said, "The gods have fallen and safety is gone," and it just struck me as an incredible piece of prose. Like, did you ever think of going, writing a novel, a non-fiction, like going into, maybe a thriller or maybe, a rom-com, anything like that, a comedy, like, you have a really good use of language, or like a wordsmith. So any of that kind of flag where it's, my next project might be a novel.
I haven't thought about it, I don't know, that seriously. I guess I probably, I don't have a good understanding of narrative and plot is probably what would keep me from writing fiction.
Yeah. But because you say you were a voracious reader kind of growing up and stuff like none of it's kind of stuck, or that kind of style for going non-fiction.
I think I've always liked language, but I don't know. Like I think almost the reason why I liked fiction so much growing up was because it seemed so kind of foreign to me. Even like the emotional worlds of others, being exposed to these emotional worlds of others was like, this is crazy. Catherine and Heathcliff or whatever, and Wuthering Heights. I'm like, these people are nuts. Like, I can't believe like the things that they're getting up to, or they think, or even just like a Jane Austen, like, why do they care so much about marriage or whatever? Like, it was almost like, for me, we have a phrase in the United States called rubbernecking, which means like if you see an accident or something kind of bad happen, then you're like, stretch your neck, you rubberneck, like keep watching it. That's how I kind of felt when I was reading fiction, was like, wow, this is so, because you normally aren't exposed to the inner worlds of others, to the extent that you are in fiction. And I think I just was like riveted, but almost like in this like almost horrific way. Like, I can't believe this is how people live their lives. This seems so crazy to me.
Yeah, and I actually picked up on that in one of it. Well, it's a different kind of story, but it was your dad banging down the bathroom door. You kind of sat there and you wondered what it was like to feel panic. And it's kind of almost the same thing you're nearly alluding to there, that it was like this observer of what was going on, more so than being kind of an engage, like to be actually in it. And it's just it's a fascinating worldview. Again, it fascinates me. Like a lot of the stuff I put on my social media on the Dark Finds page it's the other side of psychopathy. It's like, the kind of murders and stuff like that, which is definitely the darker side. But again, it goes into that dark triad you have, which is a whole different other kind of kettle of fish, like different intersecting of traits in a very strange way. I think on another podcast I heard you really eloquently describe the kind of difference with narcissism. I think it was on the Heretics podcast, where you were asked about the kind of differences between narcissism and psychopathy, and it was just really alluding to here. I'd never even heard about it in any of the kind of stuff I'd seen, but it was and actually, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going to paraphrase here, but it was narcissism. With the psychopath, there's an absence of self almost, but with the narcissist, there's a self in there, but it's weaker kind of and smaller, and the projection that they're putting on is stronger, and there's this dissonance. Is that correct, or what's your take on that again, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think when people talk about doing shadow work, because like they think, oh, the person that I'm projecting outwardly is, great, and then I have like internal shame, and I have a shadow that I feel like is the real me, and that if anybody saw the real me, then they would hate me. I think the narcissist is the extreme version of that, where they have this false sense of self that they project to other people, and then what they believe is the true self, they think is like this dark, disgusting thing that nobody would like and everybody would, find to be terrible. And the reason why they're insecure is because they have these two selves. and they're worried that people are going to find out about the secret one, and so they feel like they have to push the good one, you know, even stronger, I think, out to the world. And I think the reason why they're able to do such bad things is because, you know, and I used to kind of think this too sometimes as a psychopath. I'd be like, see something that I did and think, wow, I'm just a really shadowy person. You know, I'm a really evil person. I guess that's just who I am because look, I've just done this terrible thing, you know. And sometimes it's like, I wish almost that you could like get into my memories and see some of the faces that I saw when people realized that I did a bad thing to them. And it's just like the shock, the sadness, the disappointment, the like horror of it. It's like such a weird face. You normally don't see that face. You maybe have never seen that face, Gary, if you've never done something bad to somebody, you know, just something that's so cold-heartedly bad and like totally cruel. But it's such an interesting reaction. And I have at least like, you know, dozens of memories of seeing that face from people. And when you see that face, maybe you start thinking, hey, there's something bad about me, but it's not like I turned to kind of inner hate. And that's the thing that I think is a little bit sad about narcissists, is that they have so much hate for themselves. You know, I never hated myself. It was more like I just was like, I guess that's just, you know, I guess I'm one of the bad ones. Like, I guess that's just me, is a baddie. And it's funny, my girlfriend, who's also a psychopath, there's this song, The Midnight Rider. And she said, like, ever since she was like 8 or 9, she was like, that's me. I'm the Midnight Rider. And the song's just about like this baddie biker, you know, motorcyclist dude who's just like a baddie, you know, going around doing bad things. And so but she didn't feel pride about it, nor did she feel sadness about it. But I think the narcissist has the additional difficulty of having these other like sadness and pride kind of feelings that complicate things.
Yeah. And like, I think with the narcissist as well, there's like two types of them, which is the strangest thing. So there's the ones that are like, you know, really confident, and then there's the ones that are like really like kind of defensive, and it's, you can see the kind of two different, like, I think the more dangerous ones are the ones that get very defensive, because the ego fragility is just so, it's hanging on by an absolute thread. But yeah, fascinating. Like the Machiavellianism, and like I think if you've seen House of Cards, like I think that's probably a really good representation of it. But I read the book like Machiavelli, The Prince, and stuff like that when I was younger, and just again, I probably need to go back and reread it. You know, when you're like younger, you don't really get it as much. But I think the Frank Underwood's character is really it strikes a really good parallel. And I think actually with the start of your book as well, with the opossum and the start of House of Cards, you kind of get this little parallel as well. Now it's different. It's where Frank Underwood is coming out, and the dog is out there, but it's that kind of low affect towards the animal. But maybe the better question is, what's your maybe favorite character, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, real, historical, dead, who's one character that you would go, I can identify or relate to that character more than anyone else?
This one's not a very popular one, but actually they did do a movie. There's a book, Let the Right One In, and a Swedish movie, which I think is better than the Hollywood version, English version of the movie. But there's this character who is like a kind of androgynous, like maybe 12-year-old, but kind of presents as like a girl, and this kid who kind of like falls in love with her, he's also like 12 or something. And she just lives in this apartment by herself or something, only comes out at night. She's a vampire. There's a bunch of spoilers about this one. I mean, it never says vampire, but, you just kind of assume vampire-like creature or whatever. And they become friends, and he's her only friend, and then he gets bullied at school. This is a bunch of spoilers, but hopefully this will get people interested to watch it. And so there's a scene where he's getting so bullied that they have him in the pool at school, underwater, and whatever. And then he's like, okay, I'm gonna die, you know, like these bullies are pushing me underwater, they're drowning me. And then she shows up and it's just like, you know, a couple minutes of just like some of the most beautiful violence I've seen like on film, where there's just blood everywhere and like people are getting dragged through the pool, you know, headless or whatever, like just really. And he's kind of like, okay, yeah, you saved me, but you also did like, you just kind of like murdered these people in such a crazy way, you know, you just over the top kind of way. And she was like, I thought you would like this or whatever. And he's like, yeah, it's not like I don't like it. Obviously, you saved me. I was going to die or something, but maybe I wasn't. And did we have to kill all 10 of these kids? Like, what are we going to do now that there's been a bloodbath at our school? And they end up it ends with them, they're on a train and she can't travel during the day. So she's like in a box or something, like a trunk. And he like knocks on it and she knocks back, you know, to like let him know that she's there or whatever. And so now they're just these 12-year-old kids or whatever on the run, I guess. And I kind of think that's like, I get her, you know, a lot, I think, because she is mostly just guessing what other people want. And I think that is like, something that people don't understand about psychopaths is that, you know, and getting back to that Robert Hare quote, like, why are they so charming? Why are they able to, you know, like, you know, leave your wallet empty or something? Why are they able to be so persuasive for whatever reason? Because they're not doing it by force for the most part. You know, and that's the kind of funny thing about criminality, even probably the criminal ones that are like in jail. Maybe there was violence here and there, but for the most part, they're much more likely to be like fraudsters or even not fraudsters. It's just like in my book, I have this like line, like if you made a deal with the devil, it's probably because nobody else offered you better terms. Right. And if somebody's like seeking love, you know, but they want like total affirmation from somebody who's out of their league, you know, that might be like a good target for a psychopath who happens to be looking for targets, you know, because the psychopath is like able to give that to you in a way that even normal people can't, because they have no sense of self. They can just completely abandon whoever they are and just make like a fake kind of person that they present to you that's like tailor-made for you. And if that's kind of what you're looking for and you're willing to pay for it and you're willing to kind of whatever, then it's almost like this is like, it's like the free market. You know, there's a demand and then you have people supplying this. And do you watch the TV show White Lotus?
No, never seen it. Do you recommend?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. But there's just a bunch of rich people, you know, extremely rich people. And there's one character in particular, Tanya. And this kind of happens to her, you know, where she's really looking for love and she's lived her life without love. And then she finds this guy. And there's, you know, even when she first meets him, there's some indication that he's like a psychopath and that he's like intentionally set this up for like a meet cute, you know, for like, I was trying to get into your hotel room. Oh, this isn't my hotel room. This is your hotel room type situation. And, but she's like a mega millionaire, like you know, maybe even a billionaire. And he just kind of like has chosen her and she seems happy with him, you know, like maybe it's not real, but it's something better than what you had before kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good way to look at it. I think just even to touch back on the kind of con aspect, because like Kevin Dutton had another great book, Flipnosis. I actually think that was his best one. But it was so interesting to see like that, like the kind of where that kind of gravitational pull is like into psychics and stuff like that. Like, and like for a psychopath, I can imagine having a psychic practice, because the people that are coming in are already going to be kind of more empaths. They're kind of going to be easy, like they're primed for manipulation. It's like, you know, if you're in sales and you have an easy target, like that's what you're kind of hunting for. But that's why I think psychics work so well, and I can imagine why there'll be a gravitation of psychopaths to them. But you know, like, and this is the thing though, with the manipulation, like everything is a manipulation. When you go in to buy a car, whether I go to buy a new iPhone, someone is going to try and be like, hey, look, we'll give you 10% off or whatever. Like, I think it's a natural flow of commerce, and it's a natural flow of, like, I think human evolution. You go back probably 2,000 years, they were, hey, you take these stones and we'll give you this sheep or something. Like, it's kind of, it's always been a tactic. And then, but when it's classed then as a personality trait, oh, it's maladaptive and it's dangerous. And I think, yes, everything is dangerous, but everything probably has a, you know, like evolution, everything probably, you know, traits evolved for a reason. Like, I think there's all you, like, I think these traits can be pro-social. I think that's what I'm trying to say, as well as very maladaptive.
Yeah, I think too, even, you know, some of this, like ruthlessness, you know, it may be like the individuals that come up against the psychopath. That may seem like, oh, that's not pro-social. You know, that's antisocial, that the psychopath has used them, you know, manipulated them, whatever. You know, taken their money, you know, in the example of the White Lotus character or whatever. But overall, like, is it kind of good to have... There's an interesting word that I just learned this morning. It's called scarify, and you can do it with like grass, like lawn. There's actually a machine. Yeah, and it like it comes through, and it's very destructive, but it allows for better growth afterwards. Yeah. You know, it intentionally kind of tears everything up, and I think there's something to that, where if like a society gets too soft, you know, if a society has, you know, no kind of internal motivation to kind of look within, and to try to be like more in reality, I guess. Like the psychopath is a true reality check on people. Yeah. And I think when you have people who are delusional and they're getting used by the psychopath, and then they get this reality check, that the society also experiences the benefit of the reality check. I guess that's like the best way to put it. And the reality check may come in like a painful way. Often they do.
Yeah, that's what a reality check is. Yeah, it's definitely it's pain. It's confronting something, you know. But I think that's a really interesting point of view, because I've had this like that. You know, I think like psychopath can be dangerous to like the whole, to society. Definitely, but I think empathy can be very dangerous to the individual. And why I'm going to say this is like, so have you ever heard of that Martha McKay case? No. So it was in 1996. Pretty much in 1996, her mother and the mother's nephew got murdered. This guy burgled the house, butchered them up, killed them. You know, they were wiped out. So he gets caught anyway. He goes to prison until I think 20, maybe 18. He gets out anyway. And Martha, whose mother and cousin was murdered by this man, offers him a job because she feels the only way to heal, or she feels bad for him that he had a rough time. Offers him a job and allows him to move in, and then he slays her.
That's crazy.
Like, but this is where empathy, like where that level of empathy is really destructive. And also, I seen another thing there recently, like, and this is especially to do with women more so. Where it's like it was kind of like this social experiment where a woman's getting into an elevator and there's this really dodgy guy in the elevator, and every instinct in her body is telling her, okay, don't get in with this guy, you know, he's going to fuck me up, or he's going to do something bad to me. But politeness and kind of being kind and being her, like the, you know, the social role, you can't be you know, to be empathetic almost. This guy, you know, she gets in and, you know, she gets murdered in the elevator, and it's like, you know, empathy can be, the pat in it can be pathological as well. It can be very destructive. So what's your view on that? Like, and maybe you don't have the biggest view because empathy is probably not something that's dialed up really at all. But like, yeah, what do you think of that then? You know, of empathy being bad for the individual sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree that, well, it's not just that empathy can be bad for the individual. I think you gave a bunch of good examples, and I totally agree that there are situations, I think it's more that empathy is, maybe the reason why empathy is bad, and this is like the best way to put it, is like these people were wrong. You know, the lady who's like, oh yeah, I'll bring this killer into my house, she's just wrong. Empathy's lying to you. I guess, is like the best way to put it. If you say like the definition of empathy is that you are like feeling the other person's feelings, and if you're getting in that elevator because you're like, this is just a normal person or whatever, and it turns out that that's not true or whatever, then I think we just have a reason to question empathy. Empathy can get it wrong. I think maybe that's the good takeaway, is that we can't 100% rely on empathy, because look at these examples in which empathy was not correct.
Yeah. And by the way, to the listeners, I'm not saying empathy, there's anything wrong with it. I think you summed it up far better than me. It can get it wrong. And I think that's the thing. That's the thing we see a lot with so many cases of victims and stuff like that. Their empathy got it wrong, or just too polite and too kind, and not being able to see that, this is a fucking predator, coming after me. I don't have to be kind or nice. And again, that really go back to what Kevin Dutton talks about as well in his books, of, having that, like, maybe activating that more logical part of your brain, especially in situations like that rational side. Don't let it get swept up into the kind of maelstrom of emotional emotional chaos. Yeah.
I think, one of my favorite, he's another character that I identify with, but not for the murdering reasons, but is Ted Bundy. He really exploited his victims that way. He had like the fake cast, or he had crutches. He's trying to carry this big thing to his car. Oh, can you help me, carry this to my car with these crutches? And the empathy would say, I need to help this person. And I think maybe you could help somebody, but maybe in that situation, maybe be like, I can't be just me though. I need to also be with, let me call my friends over here or something. And I think that's kind of like the Kevin Dutton, where it's like, there has to be a second step there, where you have to kind of think, okay, this person does have a need, or that's how they're presenting, that's at least how they're presenting, is that they have a need. But then is it you who fulfills the need? Are you the best candidate, to fulfill that particular need? I think about that sometimes, because I usually am kind of like, I'll just give money to people who ask, on the street or something, give them $1 or whatever. But do I pull out my wallet? Do I stop and it's just me and that person, and I pull out my wallet and give them $1? No. I just say no in those situations, because it's okay to say, this person is presenting it as a need, and that, like my natural inclination maybe is to provide that need. But I think it's almost like a weird, like misplaced self-confidence, that nothing's going to happen to me, or something that tells people it has to be me, or almost like a God complex, like a very watered down God complex, where it's like, I have to be the one that gives them the $1 because nobody else will, or, whatever else it is. And I think that's where you really have to kind of be careful when you think it's got to be me, otherwise it's going to be nobody. That's kind of the belief combined with empathy that I have noticed seems most dangerous. That's the most volatile combination, is when people think, I am so kind of like the woman who invites the killer into her house, like, that's almost like, it does seem like a God complex, right? I'm so, strong, or so invulnerable, or so whatever it is that kind of allows her to think that that's kind of a good idea, because he truly does need help or whatever, but it needs to be somebody else, it can't be her.
Yeah, or else it's a virtue signal, and like that really stirs up as well. I think on the just when we're speaking of empathy there and virtue signal, so on the Heretics podcast, like, I can't remember the host's name, but he had a conversation. It was literally about empathy, and he went into virtue signal, and then, like, in the same breath, which really annoyed me, he starts to kind of like slander like religion, and I'm like, he's going, like, honestly, it's like someone that just hasn't been punched in the face. Like, it's just so smarmy. Like, oh, so you believe someone walked on water, kind of nearly like that, or like, you believe Jesus. And I think, like, it was just such a horrible way. He was going on about that. He had loads of empathy. Yeah, well, yeah, which clearly not. You don't go in there and attack someone's religion almost. It just, it like, I'm a Catholic, practicing Catholic, like, so, you know, when you hear someone then just kind of like mock Jesus, is a bit like, you know, all that virtue signaling in you with your empathy then. If you're able to come in so quickly, I think you handled it very well. I think I would have been probably a bit more reactive, but yeah, like, How did you feel like about that? Or are you used to that? Because I know, like, especially if you're religious these days, it's kind of, people kind of, you know, sometimes look at you with two heads almost, I feel. But, you know, how did you feel in that moment?
Well, I think there are certain things about me, other than being a psychopath, that people have, you know, let's say spicy feelings about. Like, I think one of them, for instance, is that I'm a lawyer, you know, and sometimes people don't like lawyers. I've gotten used to thinking like, oh, lawyers are liars, and how could you defend somebody that you know is guilty, and how could you kind of do all these things? And I think people largely just don't understand. I think there's like an assumption kind of made that people come into things and that they do it kind of ignorantly.
I think that's probably the word, ignorant, isn't it?
Yeah, like I went into law, you know, not knowing that I was going to have to defend criminals or something, or that there's something kind of wrong. And I think it's kind of like what you said before. If something is true, kind of evolutionarily true, like that's just what happens to be true in this moment, then there's probably a reason for it. There's probably like a good reason for it. So for instance, when back in like, this was 2016, I was talking with the person who cuts my hair, and she said I could never vote for Hillary Clinton because she, you know, defended these terrible people. And I said, do you feel the same way about doctors? You know, do you feel like if a doctor, you know, gets somebody into the emergency room with gunshot wounds, should they be like, hold it, is this a bad guy? You know, yeah. Should I be taking these bullets out? Should I be doing anything? And why would you expect the same of like a lawyer? And I think that kind of opens up the question to like, well, should we kind of prejudge somebody and, you know, never, you know, provide whatever services? And that could apply to anybody. You know, you're a dentist, you know, like, but what if this is like a child molester? You better ask everybody.
Yeah.
And have a list, you know, like, hey, so I think it's kind of a funny thing, and it invites questions. And I just think that people should have the questions, because the truth is that I have a reason for being religious. I have a reason for being a lawyer, and you can just ask the reason. But I'm also kind of just used to it, you know, like used to, you know, people making assumptions for the psychopathy, for being a lawyer, for, you know, for being Mormon, you know, because being Mormon, especially even with other religious people, can sometimes be, maybe you understand this as a Catholic, sometimes people are like anti-Catholic, even though they are Christian themselves. So, I mean, I think people just assume, you know, that like you're Catholic because you don't know better. I'm Mormon because I don't know better. I'm a lawyer because I don't know better, you know, and that's okay, because I'm willing to engage with the person and have a conversation. But I think it reflects kind of on the person making the assumptions more than I feel like it reflects on me. And that's just it.
I feel it's like, yeah, I think there's a certain level of ignorance. I think that was the right word you used. I was probably searching for it, was the kind of ignorance to, but I just don't know. Like, it's just, you know, saying, oh, empathy, you know, I can empathize with that, and then just doing the complete opposite. It was just so startling to me. But yeah, I think you have a chapter, I think is it The Child and God in the book, where you go in through a lot of the Mormon faith. And like, the thing I love about that is, like, obviously we talked earlier on about the, you know, maybe, you know, the moral compass isn't built into the hardware in your brain, but like, you know, the Mormon faith and, you know, kind of literally gave you that kind of moral underpinning that was maybe lacking from a, you know, a biological level or a kind of neurological level. So yeah, like, you know, tell us a bit about, I suppose, the, you know, the faith and kind of what it's done for you, and probably the community with church, all that. Like, you know, how has it helped?
Yeah, so I think, you know, even as you were just kind of saying that, I thought to myself, because I currently, like everybody, Mormons have like a job within the church, and my job has been recently to teach the children music. So I've been engaging with the children a lot. And so being kind of around the children has reminded me of my own childhood growing up in the church. And I think even though I didn't have empathy, people would ask me in church, and without judgment, with just like, kind of like love, like, imagine a situation if somebody like trips and falls in a puddle, what would you do? And I'd be like, I don't know, laugh or whatever. And they'd be like, okay, but try thinking.
Yeah.
Try thinking about what it's like to be them, and they would walk me through what I think psychologists call perspective taking, which is basically you're just trying to put yourself in the shoes of the person. And I think that's probably where I learned to have, to be able to perspective take, which I think people also call like cognitive empathy, like the ability to kind of, almost do a thought experiment. Yeah. How would I feel, if I was in that type of situation? And then they had like a pretty persuasive argument to me, even as a child, that we are kind of stronger as a group. And maybe I felt that too, had personal experiences that helped me to believe that, because I felt that way about my siblings, not my family necessarily, like my parents or whatever, but my siblings. Like it was like, you mentioned our parents left us, at the park or whatever. And whatever the quote was about, like, the gods have fallen.
Gods have fallen and safety is gone. Yeah,
safety's gone from adults in my life. But there were, like, other kind of children that I felt like I could kind of rely on. Or even if it's going to be just us and we don't have adults caring for us, that it's at least you and me. Like we can watch out for each other. And so that was something that I probably learned, because of Mormonism, this idea that there is strength in a group. And that is actually true, like it's not just whatever. Like I learned, I got kind of interested, maybe in my 20s or 30s about like surviving an apocalyptic event. And I started reading this book, How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It. And the guy was like, you need to have at least 15 to 20 people. Like, it can't be 8 people. It can't be 10 people. Like that, the weaker, like the smaller the number is, the weaker. And there's actually famously the Roanoke colony in the United States was the first colony, and it was lost. Nobody even knows what happened to it. It was in North Carolina, and it was the first British colony. And they just all died out. I think they had like 86 people, and that was just too small.
Yeah. I think Dunbar's number is 150, isn't it? It's like the ideal kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just like this power and community that I learned from Mormonism. And that's probably not something that most children even have to learn, because they naturally are just like, oh, Sally, she's my friend, I love her, or whatever. And there were probably like my friends at church probably felt that way about me. Like, oh, it's just Jamie. She's my friend and I love her. And that's good for them. I'm glad that they had that. But I didn't feel the same way about them necessarily. I had to think like, oh, Sally, she is an ally.
Yeah.
She's like a friend with strategic advantage, and so of course I'm going to try to help her, kind of again, getting back to this, let the right one in, where the kind of vampire child or something is like, yeah, I need this kid in a way, because he's going to be the one who's going to like help me like during the day and do things that I'm not able to do for myself. And I think that sort of, it's like Machiavellian in a way.
Yeah.
It's definitely kind of strategic, but it's like oddly the Mormon church was the thing that kind of taught me how to get along with people.
Yeah. And I think probably there was a sense of acceptance, because I think that's like what underpins a lot of Christian values is, a really genuine sense of acceptance that I think I don't care who you are, like that feels good, I mostly will anyway, but yeah. So how do people like perceive then, like psychopath then and God, like, because I think you put in the book, I think you had a term on it. It was like a worldly morality, is it? And there's godly morality, or maybe not morality, but like where almost the essence was taught that. Now I'm going to actually probably butcher it. But it was almost to the aspect of like, there's actually doing the behaviour right, and then there's almost thinking about bad behaviour, but the actual doing the behaviour is what God cares about.
Yeah, I think that's something that I have always struggled with, is because even like in a Christian religion, like Jesus says, like you've heard that it said that if you, commit adultery, that's the sin. And he says, but I'm telling you that even somebody who lusts after a woman is committing the same sin of adultery. And so there's stuff in kind of Christian scripture that suggests that it's the thoughts that are the bad thing. And I thought, am I doomed? Like I really had like religious angst about this. I thought, am I doomed because I have these thoughts all the time, to do kind of these bad things, and then the only thing I really can control is whether I choose to do it or choose not to do it. So that's something too, and I mean, like, theologians could probably argue about it, but I just kind of have come to the conclusion that I probably only can be judged for the things that I have control of, because I just don't believe in a God who would punish me for things that I can't control. But also I've learned this phrase since writing the book. Some of those thoughts were what I think are called like intrusive thoughts, where they're just kind of like generated in the brain. Like a classic intrusive thought is like you're on the cliff and there's like a thought in your mind that says jump. Like commit suicide or whatever. Yeah, you're traveling and it's like, like swerve into traffic or whatever, or like just step off the sidewalk and get hit by the car or whatever. So some of that stuff, like those aren't really your thoughts. They're not coming from you. And I think that too is maybe the distinction, like even theologically, if you were like, to have some of these thoughts could be bad, but probably not those thoughts, because those thoughts are just like misfirings in my brain or whatever. Yeah. They're not even coming from me. I'm not choosing to think about them. They're just popping up like mushrooms.
Yeah. And it's the same with dreams. Like, it's not something you can really control. You don't have much like conscious control. And intrusive thoughts. Yeah. I think it was like Kierkegaard, I think, had that, where it was like the, choice anxiety and choice paralysis, where, the abundance of choice actually creates such anxiety in people. You see it like in the clinical literature. You almost see it like now where it come out in a weird form, where there used to be like Blockbuster or like these places where people would have to go and have to buy one little, like, bring home one title, where now with Netflix people end up just scrolling through it and not actually being able to settle on a movie. Like, to spend maybe the full hour searching, no, there's probably going to be a better one, no, there's probably going to be a better one, and then they don't end up watching a movie. And it's this Kierkegaard had it, and the big example was the one you said there, was where you're on the edge of the cliff and you have so much power and choice to jump, but it creates this like anxiety where it nearly makes people want to. It's fascinating. But it's fascinating. So I actually want to talk there. So you'd said like after you'd learned that after the book. So I kind of want to talk about after the book. Like what has life been? So that came out in, was it? I want to hazard to say 2013 or?
Yeah.
The book, yeah.
2013. Yeah. 2013. So it's interesting that you say really quickly before we move on, and I'll answer what happened after the book.
Oh yeah.
Because I've never heard this said before. What you just said about like one of the reasons why, when we're standing on the cliff, the brain kind of naturally wants to think of jump, is because we have all this power and choice in that moment. And I do think there's something to that that's really interesting. And it actually reminds me of like when I talk about in the book, like ruining people, and I think that's what it kind of feels like, is I just wanted to be like on the edge of a cliff with respect to other people, in the sense that I had a bunch of power and choice with regard to that person. It's not like I actually wanted to jump off the cliff and ruin the person. I just wanted to have so much power and choice in that moment. And I think that's really interesting, I kind of never really thought of it that way. So thank you for that. That was super interesting. So after the book came out, and this is kind of interesting too with regard to religion, is because I kind of thought, like I never really experienced judgment growing up Mormon, but I was supposed to teach at the Mormon law school, BYU, Brigham Young University.
Okay.
And they were like, no. Yeah, they were like, you're not going to be able to teach here. And so there was like, legal kind of whatever. And there was a settlement. So that happened. I was currently, because I was meant to start teaching at BYU the following year. The law school that I was teaching at was in San Francisco. And I thought, San Francisco, these people are very progressive. They're very liberal. Kind of what you mentioned before, we would never talk about autistic people this way. But they too were kind of like, no, we're going to ban you from coming onto campus.
Pure discrimination.
Not just campus, but coming within 1 kilometer of campus. I was like, you can't do this. This is illegal. And I've done nothing wrong. You're just doing this completely because you were
honest.
Yeah, because I was honest. Yeah, because I have this mental condition,
Wild.
Yeah, so that happened, and so I was like, okay. And then I was teaching at a Catholic law school, and they were actually the nicest, but they didn't say, come back, we'll give you your old job back.
Okay.
They weren't that nice, but they were like, there was one woman there especially who was like, I hope to see you very soon at like these conferences and stuff, and hope that. And she had such optimism, but the truth is no. It's not like, I don't think, I just kind of had to give up being a law professor. And that made me sad because I really enjoyed being a law professor. And then I thought, am I unemployable? Like what am I qualified to do? And it seems like everybody feels the way that like these San Francisco people do or the BYU people do, which is that even if I had the skills, they're not willing to trust me. In positions of, wherever trust, which would be like a lawyer, so I'm trained to be a lawyer, but like if they're not willing to trust me to be their lawyer because they're constantly worried about it or whatever. It's turned out though, Gary, that some people want a psychopath for a lawyer. Yeah, that some people are like, actually, this is good. And it's not for like stupid reasons or whatever. It's all the reasons that we've talked about. It's like being rational, being able to kind of like not make it about me or my emotions, being able to kind of perform when called upon, not being morally judgmental about certain things. Like they'll tell me about like whatever affair that they had or something, and I'm just kind of like, that's you. And I'm fine still with whatever else. So that's been kind of interesting. And then so I just got back into law, but it was like a slow progression. And then about maybe like 4 years after, I started traveling the world a little bit to go meet other psychopaths. So I started going to therapy. And I made like a lot of progress in having a sense of self. That was basically the whole thing I did in therapy, is strengthen that sense of self, to reconnect with my own identity and my own emotions. That was like 80-90% of it or whatever in therapy. And it really helped. And I feel like I have a much stronger sense of self. And it's interesting because to a large extent, I don't experience my same symptoms of psychopathy. I probably, maybe experience like half or less than half of like the severity, the frequency, and the type even of like symptoms that I had before. There's still things that I psychopathic things about me for sure. Like I still don't feel like the affective empathy, the like, I feel for you, mirror neurons are firing or whatever. But it's interesting how much was associated with that weak sense of self. Once I kind of solved that or got better about that, then like all these other things about wanting to manipulate people, they just kind of went away.
Wow. Well, do you know what? That's really fascinating, that because like they had them Oak Ridge studies in Canada in the 70s where they fed like psychopaths a whole lot of LSD to see would it work, and it's like, no, but like that talk therapy, no, sorry, it's not the talk therapy. I think what you said there that's really elucidating is that it's finding that sense of self. So just to drill into that a bit more, was that like, how does that even process begin to work? Is it trying to identify core characteristics in you, or is it, yeah, actually, sorry, I'm going to stop hypothesizing. How does that process go?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention first the studies that they did in the 1970s, where they're like, we're going to try to treat these psychopaths, and then it failed, right? And then they were like, actually, they're quote unquote worse than they were before. And then they were kind of like, therefore they're uncurable. Like there's no treatment that can work. And I was like, you guys tried one treatment.
Yeah, a lot of LSD, like, come on.
Yeah, and a lot of LSD. Like that was your idea, and then when it didn't work, you were like, can't be cured, can't be treated. But yeah, with I think kind of primarily. Well, so I went to therapy because I knew that my relationships were suffering because I manipulated even like my very close friends and family members, and I was like just manipulating people. Kind of as my main way of kind of engaging with them, which I kind of learned when I was little, you know, like I don't actually feel these feelings, but it pays to have these relationships. In order to maintain these relationships, I will just kind of feed them what they need and what they want. And then we can remain allies. You know, it was, I thought of it like, oh, that's what allies do, is manipulate each other sometimes.
Yeah.
They cry and I apologize. You know, that's what happens or whatever. So going to therapy for manipulation, it kind of became clear to my therapist, I think, that, you know, he would say like, don't manipulate, or don't try to predict what they will prefer and then do that thing, you know, which is the same thing as manipulation. And he was like, instead, just be yourself, like just do the thing that's your natural preference. But I did not know how to be myself. And so we had to like start from like basically square one about like, well, here's how you can kind of listen to your inner voice. And it's really hard, especially like as a psychopath who was like so finely attuned to the voices around me, to try to kind of predict and control, honestly, the people around me. Like my own voice was so quiet that it was like very difficult for me to learn how to hear it. And so he gave me this thought experiment that was, imagine that you're the only one in the world, you know? So imagine a choice like, what are you going to eat for lunch or something? And imagine you're the only person in the world. And now with nobody else to predict or try to control, or even who's going to affect you at all, what does your inner voice say? So like a really kind of like almost like going into a quiet closet in my mind to be able to hear the inner voice. Yeah. And that's what it was like. And so I just did that over and over again, like this very iterative process, like hundreds and thousands of times, until I just like learned things about myself. You know, every time you do that, you learn something about yourself. You're like, oh, I want to eat salad. That I like salad. Yeah.
I think that's the most fascinating. I've never heard it in anything I've ever read or researched or looked at or ever heard that. So the operating principle was almost like it's trying to predict preference constantly, and the own internal voice then is drowned out. It doesn't get, because it's constantly trying to predict, you know, what's their preference, because that's how you're getting your edge.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay, that is such a... it's such an elucidating way to understand it, which is really kind of clear. But then trying to reverse that, I think really interesting to hear that the therapist went the route of you're the only person on earth, because that is a fascinating. Wow, I love that. I love that story. Now that's a fascinating. And that helped them, because it's like, oh, whoa, what do you know, when there's nothing to gain, like what will I do? And that's the game. So maybe there is, okay, cures is a horrible word anyway, because
treatment.
But I think treatment, treatment. Maybe that's an approach. And again, a willing participant clearly as well. You'll need.
Yeah.
So, like, I think this has been a great episode. I think before we finish up, because at the end of your book, you have the kind of epilogue part where, you know, people have reached out and stuff like that. And, like, I can imagine you must have so many people that were reaching out. Like, was there any maybe, without going into names, obviously complete anonymity, but was there any like story that really stuck with you? Like, this is wild, or this is, whoa, what is, you know, it was just so out of the box, maybe story that came in from one of the followers of your blog.
Well, I mean, there was that one about the guy who had like the kill count of 100 people. I thought that was really interesting because I had always, you know, thought, you know, maybe I should join the military. You know, maybe I would be good in the military. And I was going to do like military government work. Like I signed up to work at the FBI, and I even got through the psychological testing. So ask yourself, what were they looking for? Psychopaths? They're obviously not screening out psychopaths for that. Yeah, and then I was just to the physical fitness test, and I had to like run a mile and a half or whatever under a certain number of minutes, and I just never got there. But I have met psychopaths who do work in those agencies, and they do enjoy it. But it is kind of hard too, because you have to be very kind of self-controlled about it too, because like the government is kind of like a high demand religion. Like they're not a normal employer. Like if you do something bad at work, you're not just going to get fired. You're maybe going to go to jail. And so that's true too of being in the military. And I've met a ton of military people too who have been dishonorably discharged for various reasons because you have to have like self-control or whatever. But I don't think that I would have had the self-control, you know, like that's just too much willpower that you're exercising. Maybe during war you could, because it seems like stuff kind of loosens up during war. But it seems like during periods of non-war, they're just so strict and they're just watching you all the time. Yeah. And it's just really hard to never slip up. So I thought that was kind of an interesting trend with regard to the military and just kind of working in government in general, like these spies or whatever. Those people were interesting.
It's the compartmentalization, isn't it? Like that's what allows them, because I think, you know, for a non-psychopath or someone that would be very lower on the spectrum, say, kind of towards that more empath, neurotic side, like that, number one, the level of stress. If you're undercover, imagine like that show Tehran, if you've ever watched it, where your one is like deep in Iran territory and she's a Mossad agent or that. Like you need steel in your veins and you need to be able to compartmentalize, like what you talked about, but psychopaths are really good at that compartmentalization. So I can imagine there is a level, like there's probably some roles where they're like, oh, this person is, they scored high here, let's bring them in and put them undercover or put them in, you know, tip of the spear sort of people.
Yeah, tip of the spear is a good way to put it. They probably did test for that, especially in the 60s and 70s. The one person I know who like is a couple people that I know, CIA people, but when I think about her, she was recruited in college, and kind of that typical, like in the 70s, she was recruited in college. And I think the advantage to like the psychopath is like, you think about like the narcissist has like the real sense of self and then the false sense of self, and there's constant tension there. And I think if you're kind of portraying anything, you know, you're portraying a particular persona, there's going to be tension, because it's going to be like, I'm not really this person. You know, you have that thought that probably exists in the head of most people. I'm not really this person. I'm going to be found out. And there's that conflict. But with a psychopath, they're able to just 100% go into the role, and they forget that they're not that person anymore.
Yeah.
There's not that tension. There's not that constant tension. So that's interesting.
So believable.
Yeah.
You know,
yes.
So believable. Maybe some of the best actors
I wonder that
too. Psychopaths, like, because if they get that immersed, and to be like, it's the decompartmentalization, and to play something so convincingly, could be. You don't know. You never know.
Yeah. And then one thing that I like, though, about like seeing the emails that come in is some people are being more open, you know. So I know like somebody who's like works in science, you know, PhD in some sort of science or something, and she's open to like her coworkers, and people have just gotten used to it. They're just like, all right, that's who you are. So she doesn't have to pretend anymore. And it's really interesting. It kind of reminds me that it's like a little bit full circle what we talked about at the beginning, where I said, like back in the 1970s, they probably said autism's basically like a death sentence, to get a diagnosis of autism. And what Robert Hare said in that quote probably was true, just superficially. But I think when you dig deeper, when people are able to be more honest about who they are, specifically psychopaths, but people in general too, I'm sure, they seem to just do better. Like not just better, but since they don't have to pretend to not be a psychopath, then they're more honest, with the people around them. They're more honest with their coworkers, the people that they're dating, their family, their friends. And there's less kind of tension there in general. There's less, I think the more that they kind of are true to themselves, at least as psychopaths, there is less antisocial kind of behavior happening kind of in general. So I think it's interesting because, we talked about the treatment of shoring up your sense of self, strengthening your sense of self. But I also think that if they're allowed to just be more open, and I think Gen Z, is maybe willing to accept psychopaths. I think they're
maybe.
Yeah. And if that's true, then it's just going to be a lot easier. Like a lot of the problems like that Robert Hare was kind of identifying are not just from psychopathy itself, but from the way society treats psychopaths and saying you have to hide. Kind of like, back when it was like, if you're gay, you have to hide, you know? Yeah.
And like the thing is, like a non-violent psychopath should not have to like hide. Like that's my big thing. It should be like there should be a level of openness that I think is missing. And as progressive as society gets, like I still think it's probably that's why I'm really interested with these sort of conversations, because it's that kind of last thing that's still really a bit taboo. Like and that's why your book is so brilliant. Like, and I think it was why it was so well received. It was the honesty in it, and you didn't have to sugarcoat it and like try and make excuses for it. It's like, no, this is the way my brain works. This is my life. This is my purview of reality, and deal with it. Like, and I love that. I just love that honesty. And allowing people in to see that world, like, you can actually feel in the book where I can see, there's points there where I can see out through your eyes almost. I can see that landscape you're looking at. So everyone, I definitely recommend get a read. It's been out many years, but it's still an absolute classic, and I think it's just so relevant still. Before we go, anything else in the pipeline, or any maybe follow-up books coming, or I know you do podcasting as well, or even tell all the listeners where they can connect with you or find you.
Yeah, so I do. Some of these people, I stopped kind of traveling the world as much and mostly just see them on Zoom. So I just record these conversations. So if you ever want to just watch two psychopaths talking, then I just have a YouTube channel. And I am these ideas that my therapist taught me about how to strengthen sense of self and identity, reconnect to your identity. I am working on a second book, and that's what it's about.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. Any idea of when, or next few years maybe? Or
next few years.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, look, I can't believe we're an hour and a half. That just flew. But again, it's a good conversation. It flies. Look, thanks a million for coming on. I really enjoyed this. Found it riveting. So I can imagine the listeners will be the same. Thanks a million.
Thanks you so much, Gary. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thank you.